The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. After centuries of dreaming and decades of building, humans had joined the Galactic Consortium. This was an alliance of 47 alien species who had traveled between stars for thousands of years. For humans, it was the greatest achievement in their history. For the aliens, it was just another primitive species joining their ancient club. The meeting took place on Nexus Prime, a massive space station that floated in neutral space. The station was larger than any city on Earth. Its metal halls stretched for miles, and its windows looked out at 1,000 distant stars. Representatives from every species in the consortium had gathered here to welcome humanity into their ranks. Laura Mitchell stood at the center of the great assembly hall. She was Earth's ambassador, chosen for her calm mind and her ability to speak without fear. Around her sat hundreds of alien delegates. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no bodies at all, and existed only as light. They all watched her with curious eyes. Behind Laura stood Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harris. He was part of her security team, a soldier who had served in 3 different colonial wars. His job was to protect the ambassador, but today he was also a witness to history. He kept his face calm, but inside he felt the weight of the moment. Laura began her presentation. She had been asked to share human culture with the consortium. She chose to speak about mythology. She told them about the ancient Greeks and their tales of gods who lived on mountains. She spoke of Hercules, a hero who completed 12 impossible tasks. She described Achilles, a warrior who could not be defeated in battle. She shared stories of the Vikings, fierce sailors who believed dying in combat would take them to paradise. The aliens listened in silence at first, but as Laura continued, something changed in the room. The silence became uncomfortable. Then came the whispers. Then came the laughter. High Counselor Zirith of the Velthari was the first to speak openly. The Velthari were an ancient reptilian species with green scales and yellow eyes. They had ruled the consortium for over 12,000 years. No species had ever challenged their power. Zirith stood nearly 8 feet tall, and when he laughed, it sounded like rocks grinding together. "These are the stories of your people?" Zirith asked. His voice echoed through the hall. "Tales of impossible heroes and angry gods? Do humans actually believe these things happened?" Laura kept her composure. "These are our myths, High Counselor. They represent our values and our dreams. They show what we aspire to become." Zirith laughed again, louder this time. "You aspire to become fictional characters? How delightful. Perhaps next you will tell us that you plan to fly by flapping your arms." The other alien delegates joined in the laughter. A species called the Marinth, who resembled tall insects, clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Fenari beings, made of living crystal, chimed with mocking tones. Even the usually silent void dwellers flickered with what seemed like contempt. "The Velthari have existed for 200,000 years, Zirith continued. We stopped telling such childish stories long before your ancestors climbed down from trees. We deal in facts. In reality, in power. Your species tells tales of heroes because you have never produced any real ones." Laura felt her hands shake slightly, but she did not show her anger. "Our stories have guided us through our darkest times. They taught us to never surrender, even when facing impossible odds." "Impossible odds," Zirith repeated, as if tasting the words. "Yes, you humans do seem fond of that phrase. Perhaps because you have never truly faced them. The Velthari have conquered species far older and more powerful than yours. We do not need myths. We have history." The laughter continued. Delegates from a dozen species made jokes about the dreamers and the storytellers. One alien suggested that humans should be given a special role in the consortium as entertainers. Another said that perhaps Earth could supply fairy tales to help alien children fall asleep. Daniel Harris watched all of this from his position behind the ambassador. His face remained stone, but his jaw was tight. He had fought in battles that these aliens could not imagine. He had watched friends die defending colonies from pirates and rebels. He had been raised on the same stories they were mocking. His grandfather had told him about the Spartans at Thermopylae. 300 warriors who stood against an army of millions and refused to run. His mother had read him tales of knights who fought dragons and kings who pulled swords from stones. These were not just stories to Daniel. They were instructions. They were reminders of what humans could become when pushed to their limits. Laura finished her presentation with dignity, even as the laughter continued. When she returned to her seat, she passed by Daniel. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that look, they shared an understanding that no words could express. The aliens thought human myths were weakness. They thought the stories were proof that humans were primitive dreamers who confused fantasy with reality. They did not understand the truth. Humans did not tell stories about impossible heroes because they believed they were real. They told those stories because they wanted to become real. Every human child who heard about Hercules asked the same question: could I do that? Every soldier who learned about the Spartans thought the same thing. Would I have that courage? The Velthari and their allies would learn this lesson. They would learn it in fire and blood and the silence of their shattered fleets. But that day was still to come. For now, Laura Mitchell walked out of the assembly hall with her head held high. Behind her, the aliens continued to laugh. They had no idea that they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had mocked humanity. And humanity always proved its doubters wrong. 6 months passed after the assembly on Nexus Prime. Humanity continued building its colonies and growing its small fleet. The laughter at the assembly had been embarrassing, but life moved on. Most humans never even heard about what happened. They were too busy working, raising families, and dreaming of the future. Then the Velthari showed their true faces. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. It came through every communication channel that humanity possessed. Every screen on Earth, every radio on the colonies, every device in space played the same recording. High Counselor Zyrith appeared on the screen, his yellow eyes cold and his voice like thunder. "People of Earth," he began, "the Velthari Dominion has watched your species with great interest. You are young. You are weak. You possess resources that we require. Therefore, we offer you a choice." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Surrender all of your colony worlds to Velthari control. Accept protectorate status under our rule. Your people will serve our empire, and in return, we will allow you to continue existing. This is generous. This is merciful. You have 30 days to comply." The screen flickered to show something that made millions of humans gasp. A fleet of Velthari warships stretched across space like a wall of metal and fire. The ships numbered in the thousands. They were massive, bristling with weapons that humans could barely understand. The fleet was already moving to our human space. "If you refuse," Zyrith continued, "we will destroy your colonies one by one. We will burn your cities. We will end your species. You cannot fight us. You cannot run from us. You can only submit or die." The message ended. Silence fell across human civilization. Admiral Kevin Brooks received the news at Fleet Command on Luna. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the Terran Navy for 40 years. He had won every battle he ever fought. But as he looked at the intelligence reports, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. The numbers were impossible. The Velthari had over 3,000 warships heading toward human space. Humanity had 400. The Velthari ships were larger, faster, and carried weapons that could crack planets. Their empire had never lost a war in 12,000 years. They had conquered over 60 species. None had survived intact. Brooks called an emergency meeting with his admirals and captains. They gathered in the war room on Luna and stared at the holographic display showing the enemy fleet. Nobody spoke for a long time. "Can we evacuate the colonies?" One captain asked. "To where?" Another replied, "They will chase us wherever we go. There is nowhere to hide." "Perhaps we should negotiate," an admiral suggested. "Protectorate status might not be so bad. At least we would survive." Brooks slammed his fist on the table. The room went silent. "I did not spend my life building this navy so we could surrender to the first bully who threatens us," he said. "The Velthari think we are weak because we tell stories about heroes. They think our myths make us dreamers. They do not understand what those stories really mean. He stood up and looked at each officer in the room. Every story we tell is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Hercules was not born a god. He became one through his deeds. The Spartans were not superhuman. They were farmers and craftsmen who chose to stand and fight. Our ancestors did not conquer the world because they were stronger than everyone else. They did it because they refused to accept defeat. On Earth, President Nathan Cole addressed the United Nations. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every country. Billions of people watched on screens around the world. The Velthari have given us a choice, Cole said. Slavery or death. They believe these are our only options. They are wrong. He spoke of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held back a Persian army for 3 days. He spoke of the Alamo, where a small group of defenders faced an overwhelming force and chose to fight rather than run. He spoke of every moment in human history when people looked at impossible odds and said no. We have faced extinction before, Cole continued. Ice ages nearly wiped us out. Plagues killed millions. Wars destroyed nations. Every time, we survived. Every time, we came back stronger. The Velthari have conquered 60 species. They have never fought humans. Within hours, recruitment centers across Earth and the colonies overflowed with volunteers. Young men and women lined up by the millions, ready to fight for their species. Scientists abandoned their research projects to work on weapons. Engineers pushed their machines beyond all limits. Factories that once made consumer goods began producing warships. Dr. Megan Carter, one of Earth's most brilliant scientists, received a call from Admiral Brooks himself. She was asked to lead a secret project on Mars. The project had no name yet, but it had one goal: find a way to beat the Velthari. Megan gathered the best minds humanity had to offer. Physicists, engineers, biologists, and programmers flew to Mars in secret. They were told they had 30 days to create weapons that could save humanity. Nobody complained. Nobody asked for more time. They simply went to work. Across human space, a transformation began. Fear gave way to anger. Anger gave way to determination. The Velthari had expected humans to weep and beg for mercy. Instead, they found a species preparing for war. Admiral Brooks looked at the latest reports from the shipyards. Production had increased by 300%. New designs were being tested every day. Volunteers were training around the clock. It was not enough. It could never be enough against 3,000 enemy ships, but Brooks remembered something his father once told him. A human with nothing to lose and everything to fight for is the most dangerous thing in the universe. The Velthari were about to discover how true that was. Deep beneath the red surface of Mars, in a facility that did not exist on any map, Dr. Megan Carter stood before her team. They had been working without sleep for 2 weeks. Their eyes were red. Their hands shook from too much coffee. But nobody complained. They all knew what was at stake. The facility was called Site Olympus. The name was Megan's idea. The ancient Greeks believed their gods lived on Mount Olympus, watching over humanity and sometimes helping them in times of great need. Now humanity needed help again, but this time they would create their own gods. The Velthari have better ships, better weapons, and more experience, Megan told her team during their first meeting. We cannot beat them by building copies of what they have. We need something they have never seen before, something they believe is impossible. The consortium had rules about technology. There were certain lines that no species was supposed to cross. Energy shields beyond a certain strength were forbidden. Weapons that manipulated gravity were considered too dangerous. Neural enhancement that pushed biological limits was called unethical. Humanity had signed those treaties when they joined the consortium. Now, in a secret facility on Mars, they began breaking every single one. The first breakthrough came from a young physicist named Chris Taylor. He was only 26 years old, but his mind worked in ways that even Megan could not follow. Chris found a way to create energy shields 10 times stronger than anything the consortium allowed. He called the technology the Aegis Shield, named after the legendary shield of the Greek gods. The consortium says shields this strong will collapse and destroy the ship, Chris explained during his presentation. But they were wrong. They made a mistake in their calculations. The shield will hold. It will hold against anything the Velthari can throw at us. The second breakthrough came from Dr. Lisa Park, an expert in gravitational physics. She developed a weapon that could create tiny black holes and fire them at enemy ships. The black holes would last only a few seconds before collapsing, but in those seconds, they would tear apart anything nearby. She named it the Mjolnir Cannon, after the hammer of the Norse god Thor. One shot from this weapon can destroy a battleship, Lisa said. The Velthari have never seen anything like it. They will not know how to defend against it. But the third breakthrough was the most important, and the most dangerous. Megan herself led the research into neural enhancement. The human brain was an amazing thing, but it had limits. Reaction times, processing speed, and sensory input were all restricted by biology. Megan believed she could remove those limits. She could make humans faster, smarter, and more aware than any species in the galaxy. She called it the Achilles Protocol. The process was brutal. Nanomachines would be injected into the brain. They would rebuild neural pathways, enhance synaptic connections, and modify the nervous system. The result would be a human who could think and react faster than any computer. But the procedure had a high chance of killing the patient or leaving them brain damaged. "We need volunteers," Megan announced. "People willing to risk everything for a chance to save humanity." Commander Ryan Peters stepped forward the next day. He was a pilot, one of the best in the fleet. He had won medals in 3 different conflicts. He was 34 years old, unmarried, with no children. He had nothing to lose. "I have been preparing for this my whole life," Ryan said. "I grew up reading about heroes who sacrificed everything for their people. Now I have a chance to be one of them. How can I say no?" The procedure took 12 hours. For most of that time, Ryan screamed. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. The Nan machines tore through his brain, rebuilding him from the inside out. Megan watched with tears in her eyes, wondering if she had just murdered a good man. Then the screaming stopped. Ryan's vital signs stabilized. His eyes opened. "How do you feel?" Megan asked. Ryan looked around the room. His eyes moved differently now, taking in details that no normal human could see. He heard the heartbeats of everyone in the room. He could feel the vibration of the air conditioning through the floor. The world had become sharper, clearer, more alive. "I feel like a god," he whispered. They tested him the next day. Ryan flew a simulator against the Velthari's best recorded combat footage. His reaction time was so fast that the computer could not keep up with him. He dodged attacks before they were even fired, predicting where the enemy would shoot based on tiny movements that no normal eye could catch. Admiral Brooks visited Site Olympus a week before the Velthari fleet was scheduled to arrive. He watched Ryan fly circles around simulated enemy ships. He saw the Aegis shield absorb weapons fire that should have destroyed a cruiser. He watched the Mjolnir cannon tear apart a virtual battleship. For the first time since receiving the ultimatum, Brooks smiled. "The Velthari mocked our myths," he said to Megan. "They called us dreamers and storytellers. They did not understand that humans do not just tell stories about heroes. We study them. We learn from them. And when we need to, we become them." More volunteers came forward for the Achilles Protocol. Some died, many died. But enough survived to form a squadron of enhanced pilots. They called themselves the Immortals, named after the legendary Persian warriors. The ships were ready. The weapons were ready. The pilots were ready. Now they just had to wait for the Velthari to arrive. The Velthari fleet crossed into human space on a cold morning in March. 3,000 warships moved like a swarm of metal locusts, darkening the stars as they passed. At the head of the fleet flew the Dominion's pride, High Counselor Xyrith's personal flagship. It was the largest warship in the galaxy. Armed with enough weapons to destroy a moon, Xyrith stood on his bridge. Watching the human colony of Sigma 7 grow larger on his screens, the colony was home to 2 million humans. It would be his first target. He would burn it to ash and broadcast the destruction to Earth. He wanted the humans to see what happened to those who defied the Velthari. "Scan for enemy ships," Xerath ordered. His tactical officer worked the controls. "I am detecting a small fleet hiding in the asteroid field near the colony. Approximately 120 human vessels." Xerath laughed. 120. Against 3,000? The humans are more foolish than I thought. They should have gathered every ship they had. "Perhaps they are surrendering the colony and hoping to negotiate," another officer suggested. Perhaps Xerath agreed. Or perhaps they actually believe they can win. Either way, destroy them. "I want this finished before dinner." The Velthari fleet moved forward, weapons powering up. Xerath prepared his victory speech. He had conquered dozens of species in his long life. This would be the easiest victory of all. Then the human fleet emerged from the asteroid field, and everything changed. The ships that appeared were not the primitive vessels the Velthari expected. They were sleek and dark, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with inner light. At their head flew a massive carrier called the Valkyrie, commanded by Captain Ashley Morgan. She was 42 years old, a veteran of the colonial wars, and the first woman to command a Terran capital ship. "All ships, raise Aegis shields," Ashley ordered. "Prepare Mjolnir cannons. Immortals, launch on my command." The Velthari opened fire first. Thousands of plasma bolts streaked across space, enough firepower to destroy a fleet 10 times the size of Ashley's force. The energy slammed into the human ships like a tidal wave hitting a seawall. The Aegis shields held. Xerath watched his tactical display in disbelief. The human ships were still there, every single one of them. The shields around them glowed bright blue, absorbing the Velthari attack like it was nothing. "Impossible," he whispered. "Those shield readings are impossible. No technology can produce shields that strong." "High Counselor," his tactical officer said, voice trembling. "The humans are returning fire." The Mjolnir cannon spoke. Invisible waves of gravitational force tore through the Velthari formation. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles suddenly collapsed inward, crushed by forces they could not see or understand. Hundreds of vessels died in the first human volley. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like fireworks. "What is happening?" Xerath screamed. "What weapons are those?" No one answered. No one could. From the hangar bays of the Valkyrie and her sister ships, fighters poured into the void. These were small, fast craft, each one piloted by a volunteer from the Achilles Protocol. Commander Ryan Peters led the squadron, his enhanced mind processing the battle in ways no normal pilot could match. To Ryan, the universe had slowed down. He could see the Velthari ships moving like they were stuck in honey. He could predict where their weapons would fire before the gunners even touched their triggers. His hands moved on the controls with perfect precision, dancing his fighter through a storm of plasma fire without taking a single hit. "Immortals, engage at will," Ryan commanded. "Show them what humans can do." The enhanced pilots tore through the Velthari formation like wolves among sheep. They moved too fast to track, struck too quickly to stop. Velthari pilots, some with centuries of experience, found themselves outmaneuvered by beings that seemed to read their minds. Reports flooded Xerath's bridge. Ships destroyed by the dozens, fighter squadrons wiped out, entire wings of his fleet reduced to debris. The battle that should have been over in minutes stretched into hours. For every human ship that fell, 20 Velthari vessels died. Captain Ashley Morgan watched the battle from her command chair. Her face was calm, but her heart was pounding. They were winning. Against all odds, against 3,000 enemy ships, humanity was winning. "Push forward," she ordered. "Target their flagship. Cut off the head and the body will fall." The Valkyrie and her escorts drove through the Velthari fleet like a spear through flesh. Mjolnir cannons cleared a path. Aegis shields deflected counterattacks. The Immortals protected their flanks. Destroying any ship that came too close, Xerath watched the human flagship approaching. He saw his fleet dying around him. For the first time in his 300-year life, he understood fear. These were not the primitive dreamers he had mocked at Nexus Prime. These were warriors. These were legends brought to life. "All ships retreat," he ordered. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. "All ships fall back to Velthary space." "We are leaving." The Velthary fleet turned and ran. They left behind the wreckage of over 800 ships and the bodies of millions of soldiers. It was the first retreat in 12,000 years of Velthary history. Ashley Morgan watched them go. Behind her, the bridge crew was cheering, crying, hugging each other. They had done the impossible. They had beaten the unbeatable. She opened a channel to Earth. Admiral Brooks appeared on her screen, his tears streaming down his weathered face. "Report, Captain," he said, voice cracking. Ashley smiled. "The myths were right, Admiral. Heroes are not born. They are made. And today, humanity made enough of them to save the world." The war lasted 3 years. After the first battle at Sigma 7, the Velthary tried again and again to crush humanity. They sent larger fleets. They developed new weapons. They formed alliances with other species who feared what humans had become. None of it mattered. Every battle ended the same way. Human ships with impossible shields absorbed attacks that should have destroyed them. Human weapons tore through enemy formations like they were made of paper. Human pilots, enhanced by the Achilles Protocol, flew circles around opponents who had centuries more experience. The galaxy watched in shock as humanity. One victory after victory, species that had lived in terror of the Velthary for thousands of years began to hope. Some even sent secret messages to Earth, asking how they could help. The tide was turning. Commander Ryan Peters became a legend during those 3 years. He flew over 200 combat missions and never lost a single fight. Enemy pilots learned to fear him. They called him the Ghost because he moved through their formations like he was not really there. Some believed he was not human at all, but a demon or spirit sent to punish the Velthary for their arrogance. Captain Ashley Morgan became the youngest admiral in human history. She commanded the Second Fleet through a dozen major engagements, never losing a battle. Her tactics were studied by military academies across human space. Her name became a symbol of what humanity could achieve. But the cost was high. Millions of humans died in the war. Ships were destroyed. Colonies were damaged. Families lost fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. Victory did not come free. It never does. In the 3rd year, the Velthary finally broke. They had lost 2/3 of their fleet. Their economy was collapsing. Their allies had abandoned them. High Counselor Zereth, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, was now a desperate leader of a dying empire. He sent a message to Earth, asking for peace. The treaty was signed on Nexus Prime, the same station where humanity had been mocked 3 years earlier. The Great Assembly Hall was filled with delegates from every species in the consortium. But this time, no one was laughing at the humans. Ambassador Laura Mitchell represented Earth at the signing. She walked into the hall with her head high and her back straight. Behind her came Admiral Brooks, Commander Peters, Admiral Morgan, and Dr. Megan Carter. They were the heroes of the war, the ones who had made victory possible. High Counselor Zyrith waited at the central table. He looked older now. The scales on his face had lost their shine. His yellow eyes were dull with defeat. When Laura approached, he struggled to meet her gaze. "Ambassador Mitchell," he said, his voice quiet. "I suppose you have come to gloat." Laura shook her head. "I have come to end a war, High Counselor. Nothing more." The treaty was simple. The Velthary would withdraw from all human space. They would pay reparations for the damage they had caused. They would recognize humanity as an equal power in the consortium. In return, humanity would not pursue the war into Velthary territory. There would be peace. Zerith signed the document with a trembling hand. When he finished, he looked up at Laura with something that might have been respect. "Your species surprised me," he admitted. "When I mocked your myths at this very station, I believed I was insulting a primitive people who confused fantasy with reality. I was wrong." Laura nodded. "Yes, you were. How did you do it?" Zyrith asked. "How did a species so young defeat an empire that has ruled for 12,000 years?" Laura thought about the question. She thought about the soldiers who had died, scientists who had worked without sleep, the volunteers who had risked their minds for the Achilles Protocol. She thought about the stories her parents had told her as a child. Tales of heroes and gods and ordinary people who did extraordinary things. "You misunderstood our myths," she said finally. "You thought they were lies we told ourselves because we were weak. But that was never true. Our myths were never about the past. They were about the future." She turned to face the assembly. Hundreds of alien delegates watched her with wide eyes. "Humans tell stories about heroes because we want to become them," Laura continued. "Every child who hears about Hercules asks themselves if they could be that brave. Every soldier who learns about the Spartans wonders if they could make that sacrifice. Our myths are not fantasies. They are blueprints. They are instructions for how to be more than we are." Admiral Brooks stepped forward. He was an old man now, worn down by years of war, but his voice was still strong. "Your civilizations tell stories to remember the past," he said. "You look backward at what your ancestors achieved and try to preserve it. Humans are different. We look forward. We see what we could become, and we refuse to accept anything less." Outside the station, visible through the great windows, the Terran First Fleet held formation. 200 warships, their shields glowing softly in the starlight. They were beautiful and terrible, proof that humanity had turned dreams into reality. "You called us dreamers," Brooks said. "You were right, but you did not understand what that meant. Dreamers are dangerous, High Counselor. We dream of victory, and then we make it happen. We dream of the impossible, and then we achieve it. You should never have mocked us. You should have been afraid. The treaty was signed. The war was over. Humanity had taken its place among the great powers of the galaxy, not as newcomers, but as legends. In the years that followed, the story of the war spread across the consortium. Species that had never heard of Earth learned about the humans who had beaten the Velthari. They learned about the soldiers who fought against impossible odds. They learned about the scientists who broke the laws of physics. They learned about the pilots who became more than human. Most of all, they learned about the myths. The tales of Hercules and Achilles, of Vikings and Spartans, spread from world to world. Alien children began telling each other stories of human heroes. Alien parents began wondering if their own species could learn from the human example. Humanity had not just won a war, they had changed the galaxy. They had shown that stories were not just entertainment. Stories were power. Stories were blueprints for greatness. And humans were just getting started.